Every morning before sunrise, 12-year-old Ethan Carter pulled his worn-out sneakers over socks full of tiny holes and stepped quietly out of the small trailer he shared with his grandmother. The old woman was asleep in a chair because her aching back made it impossible to lie flat. Ethan always covered her with the only blanket they had before leaving. The cold morning air bit at his face as he carried a small wagon through the quiet streets. While most children were still dreaming, Ethan collected empty bottles and cans from sidewalks, parks, and trash bins. It wasn't glamorous work, but every bottle meant another few cents. Every few cents meant bread, milk, or medicine for Grandma Rose. Many people ignored him. Some laughed. "Look at the little garbage boy," one teenager mocked as he rode past on his bicycle. Ethan lowered his head but kept walking. He had learned long ago that arguing with cruel people never filled an empty stomach. His grandmother always told him, "Kindness is the only thing poverty can never steal." Those words stayed with him every single day. One rainy afternoon, Ethan was pushing his nearly empty wagon home when he noticed an elderly man sitting alone on a park bench. The man wore an expensive suit soaked by the rain, yet he seemed completely unaware of the storm around him. People hurried past without stopping. Ethan hesitated. He only had one sandwich, made from 2 slices of stale bread and a little peanut butter. It was supposed to be his dinner. His stomach growled loudly. Still, he walked toward the stranger. "Sir, are you okay?" The old man slowly looked up. His eyes were red, as though he had been crying. "I suppose I've had better days," he answered quietly. Ethan sat beside him without saying anything. Sometimes silence helped more than words. After a moment, Ethan unwrapped his sandwich and held it out. "You can have this." The man looked surprised. "But it's yours. I'm not as hungry as you look." That wasn't true. Ethan hadn't eaten since breakfast. The stranger accepted the sandwich with trembling hands. "I don't even know your name." "Ethan. I'm William." The old man smiled weakly before taking a bite. It was probably the simplest sandwich he'd ever eaten. Yet tears rolled down his face. "You've given me something no one else did today." Ethan shrugged. "My grandma says everybody needs someone." The rain slowly stopped. William thanked Ethan again before a black luxury car suddenly pulled into the park. Several people rushed toward the elderly man. "Mr. Harrison, we've been searching everywhere." One of the men looked at Ethan suspiciously. "Did this boy bother you?" William immediately stood. "No." He placed a gentle hand on Ethan's shoulder. "He reminded me what kindness looks like." Before leaving, William handed Ethan a business card. "If you ever need help, come see me." Ethan smiled politely but slipped the card into his pocket without looking at it. He had no intention of asking strangers for favors. That evening Grandma Rose's cough became much worse. She struggled to breathe between every sentence. "We'll visit the clinic tomorrow," Ethan promised. She smiled sadly. "We don't have enough money. We'll find a way." The next morning Ethan worked twice as hard. He searched every alley, every trash bin, every roadside. After 6 exhausting hours, he counted his earnings. Only $8. Not enough. As he sat outside the recycling center feeling defeated, he noticed a little girl crying near a busy intersection. She couldn't have been older than 6. Cars rushed past. People walked around her without stopping. Ethan immediately ran over. "What's wrong?" I can't find my mommy." Her tiny hands shook. Ethan knelt beside her. "Don't worry. We'll find her together." For nearly 30 minutes they searched nearby stores. Finally, inside a grocery market, a terrified woman screamed as she spotted her daughter. She hugged the little girl tightly before bursting into tears. "Oh, thank God." The grateful mother reached into her purse. "Please take this." She offered Ethan a $100 bill. He stepped back. "No, thank you. You saved my daughter. You need the money more than I do." The woman stared at him in disbelief. "You don't even know me. My grandma says kindness isn't something you sell." She wiped away tears. "You've restored my faith in people." Ethan simply smiled and walked away. He never noticed someone watching everything from across the street. It was William Harrison. The elderly billionaire had quietly followed Ethan after wondering whether the boy's kindness in the park had been genuine or simply an act. Now he had his answer. The child who barely had enough to survive had refused a reward most adults would have accepted without hesitation. William sat silently inside his car. For the first time in years, money felt completely meaningless. Find out everything about that boy, he quietly told his assistant. I want to know his story. As the car drove away, Ethan hurried home carrying a small loaf of bread and a bottle of milk. He had no idea that his life was about to change forever. Nor did he know that one simple sandwich given to a lonely stranger had started a chain of events that would touch thousands of lives. Part 1 End. William Harrison couldn't stop thinking about Ethan. That night, while sitting alone in his enormous mansion, he stared at the untouched dinner on the table. The chefs had prepared an expensive meal, yet all he could remember was the taste of the little peanut butter sandwich the boy had shared with him. It wasn't the food he remembered. It was the sacrifice. The next morning, William's assistant returned with a thick file. Sir, we found everything. William opened it slowly. As he read each page, his heart grew heavier. Ethan's parents had died in a car accident 5 years earlier. Since then, his 73-year-old grandmother, Rose Carter, had raised him alone. She suffered from severe lung disease but couldn't afford proper treatment. Ethan skipped school several days each week to collect recyclable bottles so they could survive. William closed the file. How many people knew about this? Quite a few, the assistant replied. And no one helped. The assistant lowered his head. I'm afraid not. William stood up. Take me to him. Meanwhile, Ethan was helping his grandmother breathe through another painful coughing fit. It's getting harder, Rose whispered with a weak smile. I'm okay. No, Grandma, Ethan said gently, holding her hand. You're not. Before she could answer, someone knocked on the trailer door. Ethan opened it carefully. Standing outside were William Harrison and 2 assistants. Ethan's eyes widened. Mr. William. William smiled warmly. I came to thank you properly. Rose immediately tried to stand. I'm sorry, our home is very small. William looked around. The roof leaked. The furniture was broken. The refrigerator was nearly empty. Yet the tiny trailer felt warmer than his luxurious mansion ever had. You have nothing to apologize for, William said softly. He sat beside Rose. You raised an extraordinary grandson. Tears filled the old woman's eyes. He's all I have, and you're all he has. For nearly an hour they talked. Ethan never once asked William for money. Never hinted that they needed help. Never complained about life. When William finally prepared to leave, he quietly placed an envelope on the table. This isn't charity, he said before Ethan could refuse. It's simply one grandfather helping another. Family. After they left, Ethan opened the envelope. Inside was enough money to cover Rose's hospital treatment. He burst into tears. Within days, Rose was admitted to one of the city's best hospitals. For the first time in years, specialists examined her thoroughly. The doctors were optimistic. If treatment continues, one physician explained, she has an excellent chance of recovering. Rose squeezed Ethan's hand. You never gave up on me. I never will. Weeks passed. Rose slowly regained her strength. Meanwhile, William invited Ethan to visit his company headquarters. The towering glass building amazed the young boy. I've never seen anything this big, Ethan whispered. William smiled. Neither had I, when I was your age. He explained that he had also grown up poor. He had built his business from nothing. But somewhere along the way, William admitted, I became so busy making money that I forgot why I wanted it in the first place. He looked directly at Ethan. You reminded me. William surprised everyone by asking Ethan to join an important board meeting. The executives looked confused. Some even appeared annoyed. One whispered, why is a homeless child here? William heard him. Because today, he replied firmly, he's the smartest person in this room. Silence filled the conference hall. William stood before the executives. For years we've measured success by profits. He paused. Starting today, we'll measure it by lives changed. He announced a new charity foundation that would provide food, education, medical care, and emergency housing for struggling families. Then he smiled at Ethan. It will be called the Carter Kindness Foundation. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. You named it after us. William nodded. Because kindness deserves to be remembered. The executives stood and applauded. Some wiped away tears. For the first time in many years, the company felt like a family instead of a business. News of Ethan's story spread quickly. Television stations wanted interviews. Newspapers printed his picture. People praised him across the country. But Ethan remained exactly the same. One afternoon, while walking home from school, he saw an elderly woman struggling to carry heavy grocery bags. Without hesitation, he rushed over. "May I help you?" She smiled gratefully. "You don't have to." "I know," Ethan answered. "But I want to." As they walked together, the woman suddenly recognized him. "You're that famous boy." Ethan laughed quietly. "I'm just Ethan." That evening William visited the trailer again. This time he brought no cameras. No reporters. Just himself. The three of them shared homemade soup around the tiny kitchen table. William smiled. "I haven't laughed this much in years." Rose looked at him kindly. "You were lonely." "I was. You have family now." William looked at Ethan. Then at Rose. For the first time since losing his own wife many years earlier, the enormous emptiness inside his heart began to disappear. Money had built him a mansion. But kindness had finally brought him home. As the night ended, William looked out through the trailer window at the stars. He quietly whispered to himself. One little sandwich changed everything. The months that followed brought changes Ethan had never imagined, but they never changed the person he was. Rose's health continued to improve. She could finally walk around the neighborhood without stopping every few minutes to catch her breath. Her laughter, once replaced by painful coughing, slowly returned to their little home. Ethan went back to school full-time. At first, some classmates treated him differently because they had seen him on television. They wanted pictures and autographs. Ethan politely smiled at everyone, but he always said the same thing. "I'm not a hero. I just did what my grandmother taught me." One afternoon, his teacher announced a school fundraiser for children whose families couldn't afford school supplies. Students were encouraged to donate money. Some gave $5. Some gave $10. When the donation box reached Ethan, he quietly slipped in every dollar of his weekly allowance that William had started giving him. His friend Noah whispered, "Why did you give all of it?" Ethan smiled. "Because someone else probably needs it more than I do." His teacher noticed but said nothing. That evening, she quietly wiped tears from her eyes as she counted the donations. Meanwhile, the Carter Kindness Foundation was transforming lives across the city. Families who had been living in cars received safe homes. Children received school uniforms, books, and warm meals. Elderly people who had gone years without medical care finally saw doctors. Every project carried one simple message. Kindness costs little, but changes everything. William insisted that Ethan attend every opening ceremony. Not because he wanted publicity. Because he wanted people to remember where the foundation had begun. Not in a boardroom. Not in a billionaire's office. But on a rainy park bench with a single peanut butter sandwich. One cold winter evening, Ethan noticed a man sitting outside a grocery store with a cardboard sign. It read, "Hungry. Anything helps." Many shoppers walked past without looking at him. Others avoided eye contact. Ethan walked inside, bought a hot meal, a blanket, and a bottle of water. When he handed them to the man, the stranger looked up in disbelief. No one stopped all day. Ethan sat beside him. "I know how that feels." The man's eyes filled with tears. "I used to own a business," he admitted. "I lost everything after my wife became sick." For nearly an hour they talked. Before leaving, Ethan quietly wrote down the foundation's address. "Come tomorrow," he said. "We'll help you get back on your feet." The man hugged him tightly. "You didn't just feed me. You gave me hope." Months later, that same man became a manager at one of the foundation's community centers. When people asked why he worked so hard, he always answered, "Because one boy believed I still mattered." Years passed. Ethan grew into a kind, confident young man. He graduated at the top of his class and later studied medicine. People expected him to become wealthy or famous. Instead, he chose to become a doctor who treated families who couldn't afford healthcare. Rose couldn't have been prouder. "I always knew your heart would lead you to something beautiful," she told him. William, now much older, often visited the hospital where Ethan worked. One afternoon he found Ethan sitting beside a frightened little boy who needed surgery. Instead of rushing away to another patient, Ethan held the child's hand until he stopped crying. William smiled. Some things never changed. A few years later, the Carter Kindness Foundation celebrated its 20th anniversary. Thousands of people gathered for the event. Families shared stories of how their lives had been saved. Children who had once received scholarships returned as successful teachers, nurses, firefighters, and engineers. Many said the same sentence. "Someone believed in us when no one else did." William, now walking with a cane, slowly stepped onto the stage. His voice trembled with emotion. People often ask me what the greatest investment of my life was. He looked toward Ethan, sitting beside Rose in the front row. It wasn't a company. It wasn't a building. It wasn't the millions I earned. He smiled through tears. It was accepting half of a little boy's sandwich on a rainy afternoon. The audience stood in complete silence. Many wiped tears from their faces. William invited Ethan onto the stage. I built a business, William said. But you built a legacy. Ethan shook his head gently. No, my grandmother did. He turned toward Rose. She taught me that kindness isn't measured by how much you have. It's measured by how much you're willing to give. The entire audience rose to its feet in a long-standing ovation. Rose smiled, her eyes shining with pride. A few months later, William Harrison passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 89. In his final letter, addressed to Ethan, he had written, "The world believed you were the one whose life I changed. The truth is, you saved mine. You taught an old man that wealth without compassion is empty. Promise me you'll keep spreading kindness, because kindness is the only treasure that grows every time it's shared." Ethan folded the letter carefully and held it close to his heart. He looked toward the sunrise, remembering the frightened 12-year-old boy who once pushed a wagon through empty streets collecting bottles. Back then, he had believed he had nothing to offer the world. He had been wrong. Sometimes, the greatest miracle doesn't begin with millions of dollars. Sometimes, it begins with a hungry child who chooses to share his only sandwich. And that single act of kindness continued to echo through countless lives, proving that even the smallest act of compassion can create a legacy that lasts forever.